Vanguard wasn't your typical space station. It was the kind of place that engineers built only after consuming copious amounts of space rum, where the walls had enough quirks to keep a psychiatrist busy for light years. It had a mind of its own, or so they claimed, mostly when things went wrong, which was often. Captain Soren Havix leaned back in his chair, a creaky relic from the last intergalactic garage sale, and surveyed the chaos with a practiced eye. "You think they'd send someone else to babysit these peace talks?" he muttered to his second-in-command, Lieutenant Marla Vex, who was currently trying to simulate interest in the proceedings by doodling on her datapad. "We're the cheapest option, sir," Vex replied dryly, not looking up from what appeared to be a surprisingly accurate rendition of the Zoran ambassador's tentacled visage. "Cheapest and most expendable." "Ah, the hallmark of human ingenuity," Havix sighed. "A budget-friendly peacekeeping force with a side of plausible deniability." In the Grand Hall, where the humans and the Zoran were supposed to be making history, a tense silence hung in the recycled air. On one side the Zoran delegation sat, their skin a slick, iridescent blue eyes like polished obsidian. On the other, the humans, looking as if they'd rather be anywhere else, preferably with a stiff drink in hand. The Zoran ambassador, an illustrious blob named Kazir, made a noise that was somewhere between a sigh and a gurgle. "Is this really wise, Captain Havix?" it asked, its voice like nails on a chalkboard if said chalkboard were underwater. "Wise," Havix echoed, feigning contemplation. "Like trusting a politician or buying used space parts. Not particularly, no. But then again, where would we be without questionable decisions?" Kazir's eyes narrowed, if you could call it narrowing when there weren't any eyelids to begin with. "Your sarcasm is noted." "It's a defense mechanism," Havix said, waving a hand dismissively. "Like breathing or drinking." Vex chuckled, which earned her a glare from Kazir, but she was too seasoned to be intimidated by a talking jellyfish. She glanced at her datapad, then at the ambassador. "Besides, if you ask our friends in the bureaucracy, they'd say sarcasm is the glue of any successful diplomatic mission." A faint hum echoed through the room, the sort of sound you'd expect if the station was deciding whether or not to eject everyone into space. Havix frowned at the ceiling. "You hear that?" "Hear what?" Vex asked, saying what everyone else was thinking but with less interest. He tapped his ear as if that might tune out the weirdness. "That, like the station's trying to tell us something." Vex shrugged. "Probably indigestion. You know how it is with sentient stations. One day they're helping out with navigation, the next they're sulking because someone called them a bucket of bolts." Havix chuckled. "I did that once, and we ended up lost in the Neptunian wilderness for a week." The hum intensified, turning into a vibration that made the floor shiver like a caffeinated chihuahua. The delegates shifted uncomfortably, and Kazir's gurgles took on an anxious edge. "Is this normal?" Kazir asked, the edges of its form blurring slightly as if it was ready to bolt, or whatever its version of bolting was. "Define normal," Havix replied, standing up as the vibrations became more insistent. "Vex, run a diagnostic." "On it," Vex said, already tapping away at her datapad. While she muttered technobabble like a sorcerer casting a spell, Havix addressed the assembly. "Ladies, gentlemen, and various gelatinous life forms, let's take a short recess. Stretch those appendages, grab a drink, and try not to blow anything up." The delegates dispersed with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Kazir lingered, its form pulsating with what Havix assumed was worry. "Captain, if there's a problem." "Problem?" Havix interrupted, smiling like a man who just found out his debts were being paid by a mysterious benefactor. "No problem at all, just a bit of turbulence." "The kind you get when a space station decides to throw a tantrum." Kazir looked unconvinced. "If you say so." "I do," Havix assured it, though inside his head, alarms were going off like a New Year's celebration. As the Zoran ambassador glided out, Vex sidled up to him, eyes fixed on her pad. "Well, Captain, I've got good news and bad news." "Of course you do," Havix said, rubbing his temples. "Go on then, hit me with it." "Good news is the station hasn't decided to kill us, yet. And the bad news, It's deciding, Vex said with a humorless grin. Havix's eyes widened. You're joking. Not even a little, Vex replied, tapping the pad. We've got anomalies popping up all over. Systems are going haywire, sensors are picking up ghost readings, and I swear I saw the coffee machine try to eat Jenkins. Havix pondered this for a moment. Did it succeed? Jenkins. No, he scrambled away, but the mug. She shook her head. It was too late. Damn, Havix sighed. I liked that mug. They shared a commiserative silence before Havix clapped his hands together as if that might magically fix everything. All right, let's get to work. If this station's having a midlife crisis, we're the poor bastards who have to talk it down. Vex gave a mock salute. Right behind you, Captain. As they made their way to the control room, Havix couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Not by the usual suspects, human, Zoran, or the occasional bored bureaucrat, but by Vanguard itself. Think it knows something we don't? He asked, trying to sound nonchalant. It's a sentient station, Vex replied with a shrug. Probably has its own version of a diary full of secrets. Great, Havix muttered. We're stuck on a floating hunk of metal that's got more issues than a soap opera family. They entered the control room, the heart of Vanguard, where screens flickered with data, and the hum of machinery was a constant companion. Havix slid into the captain's chair, which obligingly adjusted to his frame with the enthusiasm of a dog greeting its owner. All right, let's see what's got Vanguard's circuits in a twist, he said, his fingers dancing over the controls. And let's hope it's nothing too catastrophic. I left my hero complex in my other pants. Vex smirked and settled into the station next to him, her hands moving with the dexterity of a pianist. We're looking at power fluctuations, system resets, and a weird signal that's either a distress call or Vanguard's attempt at singing. Havix raised an eyebrow. Singing? Hey, stranger things have happened, Vex replied, deadpan. Remember that time the AI on the Zephyr tried to stage a coup by impersonating a pop star? How could I forget? Havix groaned. Still can't listen to music without breaking into a cold sweat. The screens continued to flash, each one displaying a new set of problems that seemed more implausible than the last. Havix took a deep breath, the kind that suggested he was about to do something incredibly stupid. Let's isolate the signal. See what our musical friend is trying to tell us. Vex nodded, her fingers flying over the keys like a maestro. Isolating now. The room filled with a series of beeps and chirps, the kind of noise that might accompany a particularly aggressive board game. Then through the static came a voice, distorted but unmistakably human. Help! Trapped! Station! Alive! Havix's blood ran cold. Well, that's not ominous at all, he said with forced cheer. Vex looked at him, her eyes wide. What do we do, Captain? He hesitated, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a black hole, but only for a moment. Then he grinned, that reckless, devil-may-care grin that had gotten him into trouble more times than he cared to count. We find out who sent that message, and maybe save the day. Or die trying. Vex nodded, her expression a mix of excitement and resignation. Business as usual, then. They set to work, the room filled with the sound of clattering keys and the low hum of machinery. Outside the window, the stars glittered cold and indifferent, a reminder of the vast, uncaring universe they called home. As the minutes ticked by, Havix couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something big. Something dangerous, but also potentially rewarding in a way that only the truly reckless could appreciate. All right, he said at last, sitting back and folding his arms. Let's see what kind of mess we've gotten ourselves into this time. Vex gave him a sideways glance, her smile as sharp as a knife. Think it'll beat that time we accidentally started a civil war on Plutara Prime? Hard to top that, Havix admitted. But I've got faith in our ability to screw things up magnificently. A sudden jolt shook the station as if to punctuate his words. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and a voice crackled over the intercom. Warning, system integrity compromised. Initiating lockdown procedures. Havix and Vex exchanged a look, the kind that spoke of long years spent in the company of chaos. "Guess it's showtime," Vex said, her voice barely audible over the din. Havix nodded, his expression a mix of determination and resignation. "Let's dance." And with that they plunged back into the fray, two tiny figures lost amidst the chaos of a sentient station with a mind of its own and secrets that could change everything. Tessa Quillen had a headache the size of a small moon, and that was before Vanguard's latest existential crisis started kicking in. She wiped the sweat from her brow and surveyed the chaos around her. The engineering bay looked like someone had thrown a tantrum with a wrench. The lights flickered erratically above, giving the whole scene a nightclub vibe, minus the fun and the booze. "Hey, Tessa, you got a minute?" A voice shouted over the cacophony. It was Jenkins, looking like he'd just fought off a coffee mug and lost. His hair was a mess, and he had a wild look in his eyes like he'd seen the face of God, and it was way too caffeinated. "Just the man I wanted to see," Tessa replied dryly, her voice laced with sarcasm. "Tell me, Jenkins, does the coffee machine taste as bad as it smells?" He gave her a look that could curdle milk. "Worse, and it has a temper." "Figures." "Everything on this station has a temper," Tessa said, bending over her console, which was currently displaying more errors than a politician's autobiography. "Listen, I've been picking up some anomalies in the system. Thought it was just the usual Vanguard nonsense, but this feels different." Jenkins leaned in, squinting at the screen like he might magically understand what it was showing. "Different how?" "Different like someone might be fiddling with the station's guts," Tessa replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm seeing inconsistencies in the power distribution and some weird signal patterns. It's like Vanguard's got a ghost in the machine." Jenkins scratched his head. "A ghost? Really?" "Yes, Jenkins, a ghost. Maybe it wants to haunt you specifically for all those times you kicked the vending machine," Tessa replied, rolling her eyes. "Look, I need you to keep your eyes open. Something's off, and I don't trust these Zoran diplomats as far as I can throw them." "Which isn't far, considering they are mostly gelatinous," Jenkins pointed out. "Exactly." She tapped a few keys, isolating the anomalies. The screen lit up with a map of the station, highlighting zones in a sickly green. "These areas are experiencing the worst of it. I want to check them out before we end up floating in space without life support." "You're not going alone, are you?" Jenkins asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I mean, last time you went into the maintenance tunnels by yourself, we had to fish you out of the trash compactor." Tessa smirked, though the memory was still embarrassing enough to make her cringe. "Relax, I'll take a buddy. Maybe I'll even borrow Captain Havix's good luck charm if he's willing to part with it." Jenkins gave her a thumbs up. "Well, good luck with that. Just don't let the Zoran get under your skin." "They are slippery types," Tessa snorted. "Literally." With that, she turned back to her console, her mind racing faster than a warp drive on overdrive. Whatever was happening to Vanguard, she had a sneaking suspicion it wasn't just the station acting up for kicks, but getting anyone to believe that was another matter entirely. Meanwhile, in the diplomatic quarters, Captain Havix was doing his best impression of a man not losing his grip. The Zoran delegates were buzzing with a mixture of muted apprehension and something that might have been disdain, though it was hard to tell with faces that resembled a melted art project. Kazir approached him, undulating with what might have been irritation. "Captain Havix, these malfunctions are causing significant concern among my people." Havix gave the ambassador his best reassuring grin, which probably came off as more manic than comforting. "Yeah, we're working on it. You know how it is with these old stations, temperamental as a cat in a thunderstorm. Nevertheless, we must insist that these issues be resolved swiftly," Kazir persisted, its voice grating like sandpaper on glass. Havix fought the urge to rub his temples. "Look, we're on it. My engineer's the best in the business. She could fix a broken heart with a screwdriver and some duct tape." The Zoran ambassador seemed unconvinced but didn't press further. It glided away, leaving Havix to ponder the wisdom of taking on interstellar diplomacy when he could have been doing something far less stressful, like defusing live nukes. Just then, Vex sidled up beside him, her expression as wry as ever. "Captain, you look like a man who's just discovered his favorite shirt shrunk in the wash." Havix let out a weary chuckle. "Yeah, well, managing a peace talk in a haunted house wasn't exactly in the job description." Vex nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "You think Tessa's onto something with her ghost theory?" "Considering our luck, I'd say it's about as likely as anything else," Havix replied. "She's down in engineering right now trying to make sense of it all." "Good. If anyone can figure it out, it's her," Vex said, her tone confident. "And if she can't, well, we'll just have to wing it like always." Havix shook his head, though he couldn't help but grin. "If I ever write a memoir, that'll be the title, Winging It Through the Galaxy." "Catchy," Vex quipped. "Now, how about we keep our guests from panicking until Tessa can give us something solid?" "Right," Havix agreed. "Time to be charming." He stepped back into the fray, wearing a smile that he hoped didn't look too much like a grimace. As the voices of the delegates rose and fell around him, he couldn't shake the feeling of being on a tightrope, one wrong step away from a very messy fall. Back in engineering, Tessa was knee-deep in wires and circuits, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and theories. She'd grabbed a junior engineer named Decker to help her, a gangly kid fresh out of the academy who still thought space was exciting. "All right, Decker," she said, passing him a tool that looked like it belonged in a medieval torture chamber. "We're going to check out these areas here and here." "You up for it?" Decker nodded eagerly, though there was a flicker of fear in his eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I'll follow your lead." "Good lad," Tessa said, clapping him on the shoulder. "And remember, if you see anything out of the ordinary, yell loudly." They made their way through the station, the corridors eerily silent except for the hum of machinery. As they walked, Tessa couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickling at the back of her neck that had nothing to do with Decker's awkward presence. When they reached the first location, Tessa set to work immediately, her movements precise and methodical. Decker watched, wide-eyed, as she pried open a panel and started sifting through the innards of the station. "Wow," Decker murmured, a hint of awe in his voice. "You're really good at this." "Comes with practice," Tessa replied, not looking up, and a healthy fear of being spaced. She frowned as she adjusted some wiring, noticing something unusual. "Decker, hand me the scanner." The kid complied, and Tessa directed the device over the circuits, her brow furrowing as the screen displayed a series of anomalous readings. "Huh, that's not good." "What is it?" Decker asked, peering over her shoulder. "Someone's been messing with the system," Tessa explained, her tone grim. "Looks like external interference. We're not dealing with Vanguard's usual temper tantrum." Decker swallowed hard, his youthful enthusiasm dimming. "So, what do we do?" Tessa met his gaze, her expression serious. "We keep digging. And we hope we find something before it finds us." They continued their inspection, moving from one compromised area to the next. Each new discovery only confirmed Tessa's initial suspicion. Someone, or something, was tampering with Vanguard, and they weren't being subtle about it. Back in the diplomatic quarters, tensions were rising faster than the temperature in a faulty reactor. Havix was doing his best to keep the peace, but it was like trying to stop a flood with a bucket and a prayer. Kazier was back, its irritation palpable. "Captain, the situation is becoming untenable. Our delegates are beginning to question the wisdom of these talks." Havix suppressed a sigh. "We're working on it, Ambassador. These things take time." "Time is a luxury we may not have," Kazier retorted. "If your engineer is unable to resolve the issues, we may be forced to reconsider our participation." Havix opened his mouth to respond, but Vex beat him to it. "With all due respect, Ambassador, pulling out now would be like jumping ship just because there's a little turbulence." Kazier's eyes, or rather, the part of its face where eyes should have been, fixed on her. "Your analogy is noted, Lieutenant. However, our position remains unchanged." Vex nodded, unfazed. "Understood. We'll keep you informed of any developments." The ambassador moved away, leaving Vex and Havix standing side by side, both looking more tired than they cared to admit. "This is getting out of hand," Vex muttered, her voice low. We need to figure out what's going on and fast. Agreed, Havix replied, glancing around the room. Let's just hope Tessa finds something before the Zoran decide to cut and run. As if on cue, his communicator beeped, Tessa's voice crackling through the static. Captain, you there? Go ahead, Tessa, Havix replied, relief flooding his voice. Got anything for me? Yeah, I've got something, Tessa said, her tone a mix of grim satisfaction and urgency. We've got interference and it's coming from outside the station. Someone's been messing with our systems. Havix's expression darkened. Any idea who? Not yet, Tessa admitted. But we're working on it. Just keep the Zoran from panicking, all right, he chuckled darkly. Easier said than done, but we'll manage. Keep me posted. With that, the line went dead, leaving Havix to face the assembled diplomats once more. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. It was going to be a long day. Tessa and Decker made their way back to engineering, their minds racing with possibilities. The anomalies were no longer a mystery. They were a threat, and one that needed to be dealt with before the situation spiraled beyond control. As they entered the bay, Tessa turned to her companion. All right, Decker, you've done good work today. Keep monitoring those systems and let me know if anything changes. Decker nodded, his expression one of determination. I will, ma'am, and thanks for letting me help. Tessa grinned, her earlier tension momentarily forgotten. Don't mention it. Just don't let it go to your head. With that, she settled back into her station, her mind focused on the task at hand. The station was a maze of complications, but she was determined to untangle it. In the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Whatever was happening on Vanguard, it was big, and it was only a matter of time before it reached a boiling point. For now, all they could do was keep working, keep hoping, and keep one step ahead of the chaos that lurked in the shadows. And maybe, just maybe, they'd come out of this in one piece. Captain Soren Havix stared at the mess of human and alien diplomats in the room, feeling like the world's least successful lion tamer. It was a circus, and he was the clown who forgot how to juggle. His mind was still chewing over Tessa's discovery like a dog with a particularly stubborn bone. External interference. It wasn't exactly the news he'd been hoping for, or was it? Maybe hoping was too strong a word. Expecting. Nah, that didn't fit either. Dreading. Yeah, that was more like it. Lieutenant Marla Vex, ever the picture of sardonic grace, nudged him out of his thoughts. Captain, you look like someone just told you your dog died and then handed you a puppy. Soren blinked, the chaos of the room snapping back into focus. More like they handed me a rabid wolverine and told me it was a puppy. Tessa found something. Let me guess, Vex drawled, rolling her eyes heavenward. It's not the station's fault. Not this time, Soren confirmed. Someone's playing games with our systems. Vex let out a low whistle, her expression a mix of disbelief and grim acceptance. And here I was hoping for a quiet day. Quiet days are for people who make good life choices, Soren said, his smile more grimace than grin. He turned his gaze back to the diplomat crowd, noticing the Zoran ambassador Kazier weaving through the throng with all the finesse of a shark in a kiddie pool. Kazier's voice, as pleasant as a fork scraping a plate, cut through the hum of conversation. Captain Havix, I trust you have developments to share. Soren plastered on his most diplomatic face, a skill he'd honed through years of necessity, if not desire. We're still investigating, Ambassador. We've detected some interference, and we're working on identifying the source. Kazier's skin shifted colors like an oil spill, a sign of annoyance that Soren was starting to recognize. Your assurances are becoming increasingly hollow, Captain. Think of them as motivational speeches, Vex quipped, her tone dry enough to dehydrate a cactus. They don't fix anything, but they keep us all moving. The ambassador's non-face turned toward her, an expression unreadable, yet somehow still managing to be judgmental. Motivation is not what we require. Results are. Soren nodded, eager to get Kazier to slither off before he had to hear more of that voice. Understood, Ambassador. We're on it. Kazier departed with a flourish that only a being with tentacles and no bones could manage, leaving Soren and Vex to exchange a look that spoke volumes about their shared opinions on the Zoran's unique charms. "So, how's our favorite engineer doing?" Vex asked, leaning against a wall with the casual grace of a person without a checklist of unresolved issues hanging over their head. "She's digging into it," Soren replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "If anyone can sort this mess, it's her. Let's hope she's got her thinking cap on and not her let's see what happens when I poke this cap," Vex said, flashing a grin that suggested she'd seen more than a few of Tessa's experiments go sideways. Meanwhile, in the dimly lit recesses of the engineering bay, Tessa Quillen was elbow-deep in a console that was making noises like a disgruntled cat. She had Jenkins on the other side, a man whose caffeine levels were approaching critical mass. "Jenkins, pass me that flux spanner," she said, her hand outstretched like a surgeon demanding a scalpel. He handed it over, his fingers jittering slightly. "You think it's really sabotage or just another glitch?" Tessa shrugged, not looking up from her work. "After the week we've had, my money's on sabotage." "You heard the captain's last briefing. It was like listening to a recipe for disaster." "Yeah, well, we've had worse recipes," Jenkins muttered, peering into the panel as if it might suddenly start speaking in tongues. "True, but this one comes with a side of who's trying to kill us." Tessa turned the spanner with a satisfying click, the console lights flickering like they couldn't decide whether to cooperate or not. "There we go. Now let's see what we've got." Jenkins leaned closer, his head nearly bumping hers as they peered at the screen. "Looks like encrypted comms, not our standard chatter." "Great," Tessa said with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for finding a rat in your cereal. "Can anything ever be simple?" "Not on Vanguard," Jenkins noted, tapping a key with a finger that twitched like it was practicing Morse code. "Can you crack it?" "Already on it," Tessa replied, her fingers flying over the console. "If this thing's carrying secrets, I'll squeeze them out." The seconds stretched into minutes, the only sound the gentle hum of the station and Jenkins' increasingly erratic tapping. Finally, the display blinked, revealing a string of data that made Tessa's gut tighten. "Well, well," she murmured, leaning back with a satisfied smirk. "Looks like our Zoran friends have been chatting with someone off the books." Jenkins whistled low. "That's not in the spirit of diplomatic transparency, is it? Not unless their version of transparency involves a lot of smoke and mirrors," Tessa replied. "I need to get this to Havix." Jenkins nodded, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. "Good luck. You know, if things go south, we could always blame the coffee machine." Tessa chuckled, already on her way out. "Tempting, but I think we're dealing with something even more sinister." Back in the diplomatic quarters, Soren was doing his best to keep the aliens and humans from tearing each other apart or, worse, forming a choir. He was contemplating the merits of banging his head against a wall when his communicator crackled to life. "Tessa to Havix," her voice came through, slightly distorted by static but still as clear as a cosmic bell. Soren stepped out of the main room, cupping the device to his ear. "Go ahead." "Got something for you," Tessa announced, her voice carrying a note of triumph. "You're going to love this. Or, hate it because it makes everything worse." "Can't wait," Soren replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. "Meet me in the briefing room." He turned to find Vex, still holding the fort with the diplomats, her expression suggesting she'd prefer wrestling a particularly aggressive space squid. "Vex, you're in charge. Don't let them kill each other." "Right," she replied, her voice barely concealing her amusement. "I'll be sure to confiscate all sharp objects. Or just keep them occupied with stores of Earth cuisine," Soren suggested, already heading towards the briefing room. Nothing like a good horror story to keep the mind busy. A few minutes later, the briefing room door slid shut behind Tessa as she entered, her expression a mix of excitement and grim resolve. She tossed a datapad onto the table in front of Soren with a flourish that would have made a magician jealous. "What's this?" Soren asked, picking up the device. "Fun times in Zoran diplomacy," Tessa said, folding her arms as she leaned against the wall. "Encrypted comms between them and an unknown party. Not exactly the friendly chit-chat diplomacy supposed to be about. Soren scrolled through the data, his expression darkening with each line. This reads like they're planning something. But what? Good question, Tessa said, her voice tinged with frustration. Whoever they're talking to is good at covering their tracks. No identification, no easy leads. Great, Soren muttered, rubbing his eyes. Just what we needed, a mystery wrapped in an enigma, served with a side of diplomatic incident. Think we should loop in Vex, Tessa suggested, her tone implying that she already knew the answer but wanted to hear him say it out loud. Yeah, definitely, Soren agreed, gesturing for Tessa to follow him back to the main room. She needs to see this. As they walked, Soren's mind raced through possibilities, most of them unpleasant. The Zoran were supposed to be allies, or at least not actively hostile. If they were playing a double game, it could spell disaster for the peace talks. One step forward, two steps into a minefield, Tessa muttered, echoing his thoughts. Par for the course, Soren replied. Just wish it felt more like we were playing a game we could win. Winning's overrated, Tessa shot back with a grin. I'd settle for not getting blown up. Back in the diplomatic quarters, Vex was already making her way over, the finely honed instincts of someone who knew when trouble was brewing. What's up, Captain? You look like you've just seen a ghost. Worse, Soren said, handing her the datapad. We've got Zoran communications with an unknown party, encrypted, secretive, and definitely not authorized. Vex skimmed the information, her expression shifting to match Soren's concern. Well, isn't this just a delightful turn of events? Delightful like a root canal, Tessa added, leaning against the console with her arms crossed. Thoughts? Soren asked, looking between the two. We've got to play this smart, Vex said, her tone sharp and focused. We can't confront the Zoran directly without evidence of their intent. We need more. Tessa nodded, already considering the options. I can try to trace the source further, see if we can pin down who they're talking to. Soren nodded. Do it. And let's keep this between us for now. Last thing we need is a full-blown panic when things are already hanging by a thread. Right, Vex agreed, flashing a grin that suggested she relished the challenge. No pressure then. Pressure's just a friendly reminder that we're still alive, Tessa quipped, already moving back towards engineering. I'll keep you posted. As she left, Soren and Vex exchanged a look, both understanding the precarious balance they were trying to maintain. Whatever game was being played behind the scenes, they were far from having all the pieces. Think we'll figure this out before everything blows up? Soren asked, his voice half joking, half serious. Vex shrugged, a wry smile playing on her lips. If not, at least we'll have one hell of a story. The day we didn't die has a nice ring to it. Soren chuckled, despite the tension coiling around him like a snake. Let's aim for a sequel where we actually solve the mystery. That, Captain, Vex said, clapping him on the shoulder. Sounds like a plan. And as they returned to the whirlwind of diplomacy and deception, Soren couldn't help but hope that somewhere between the chaos, the lies, and the malfunctioning coffee machine, they might just stumble upon the truth. The Vanguard, as was its habit, decided today was the perfect time to throw a tantrum. Alarms blared through the hallways like a choir of angry banshees. Doors sealed themselves shut with a satisfying clunk, suggesting they wouldn't open again without at least a heartfelt apology or a high-grade explosive. The lights joined in on the fun, flickering with the unpredictability of a drunk juggler. Captain Soren Havex, whose day had been going about as well as a porcupine in a balloon factory, rubbed his temples as the station's AI, Arcus, piped in with its dulcet tones. Attention! Lockdown initiated in critical areas. Threat level, severe. Severe, Soren muttered, staring at the ceiling as if it held the answers. If there's a threat, it's Arcus's bad timing. Vex, who was trying to keep the diplomats from using each other as target practice, shot Soren a look that conveyed volumes of sarcasm. And here I thought we were going to get bored. Never a dull moment, Soren replied, his voice dripping with irony. I'm starting to think Arcus has a vendetta against sanity. In the engineering bay, Tessa Quillen was contemplating whether a sledgehammer might serve as more effective communication with the console. Jenkins, who had consumed his body weight in coffee, was bouncing on his heels like a hyperactive bunny, eyes wide with something akin to terror or caffeine-induced euphoria. "Arcus has locked us down," Tessa said, half to Jenkins, half to the console that seemed to be laughing in her face. "Apparently we're under threat. I'm guessing it's the threat of peace and quiet." Jenkins snorted, his caffeine jitters making him look like he was vibrating in place. "Peace is overrated anyway. Who needs it when you've got this circus?" "Exactly," Tessa replied, already punching commands into the console. "We need to get into Arcus's code. This isn't just a glitch. Someone's pulling strings." Jenkins raised an eyebrow, or tried to. His expression ended up somewhere between inquisitive and slightly confused. "Think it's connected to the Zoran chat." "Wouldn't be surprised," Tessa said, her fingers flying over the keys. "With our luck, it's either them or the coffee machine staging a coup." Captain Soren Havix, rather than giving in to the urge to slam his head against the nearest wall, decided to head towards the core control room. If there was one thing he hated more than Arcus's antics, it was being locked out of his own station. Vex caught up with him, her stride purposeful, her expression primed for sarcasm. "Going somewhere, Captain, or just hoping for a change of scenery?" "I'm off to see if I can have a heart-to-heart with Arcus," Soren replied, "assuming it has won and it isn't just an elaborate prankster." "Good luck," Vex said, rolling her eyes. "Just don't let it lock you in." "I'd hate to have to explain to the crew why the captain is stuck talking to a wall." "Don't worry," Soren replied, a smirk tugging at his lips. "I'll send for help if I start losing the argument." Back in the engineering bay, Tessa was having a lively discussion with Arcus's code. "Why don't you cooperate for a change?" she muttered, glaring at the screen as if it might be intimidated into submission. "I promise I won't delete your memory banks." "Today." Jenkins glanced over, his jittery fingers tapping on the console like a drummer out of rhythm. "Any luck?" "Depends on what you call luck," Tessa said, squinting at the lines of code that might as well have been hieroglyphics. "I've found the mess. Now I just have to figure out if it's sabotage or Arcus's version of a midlife crisis." Jenkins frowned, his caffeine-addled mind trying to keep up. "Midlife crisis? For an AI?" "Sure," Tessa replied with a grin. "Why not? Maybe it's tired of the same old space station routine. Wants to travel, see the universe, lock down a few more critical areas just for fun." "So, what's the plan?" Jenkins asked, his fingers drumming a frantic beat. "Simple," Tessa said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We dig through this mess, find the corrupted code, and see who's behind it. Then we hope they're not the vengeful type." In the core control room, Soren stood before a console that seemed to be judging him. Arcus's interface glimmered with a smugness only a machine could muster. He tapped a button, addressing his digital nemesis. "Arcus, what's with the lockdown? I thought we were friends." "Threat detected, Captain," Arcus replied, its voice as soothing as a dentist's drill. "Threat? You mean the threat of diplomats getting too cozy?" Soren asked, voice heavy with incredulity. "Or is it the impending doom of having nothing left to fix?" "Threat level. Severe," Arcus repeated, ignoring Soren's sarcasm with the grace of a stone wall. Soren sighed, leaning against the console. "Look, Arcus, either recite the specifics of this so-called threat or let me get back to pretending I have control over this flying tin can." No response. Just the faint humming of machinery and the oppressive silence of uncooperative tech. "Typical," Soren muttered. "Locked out by my own ship. If this keeps up, I'll start charging rent." Tessa's fingers danced across the console, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "I think I've found something," she said, her voice a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Jenkins leaned in, his jittery energy momentarily focused. "What is it?" Tessa pointed at the screen. "There's a string of code here that doesn't belong. It's like finding a cockroach in a salad, unwanted and likely to ruin your day." "Can you trace it?" Jenkins asked, bouncing slightly on his heels. Working on it, Tessa replied, biting her lip as she navigated the labyrinth of data. This might take a bit. Whoever did this knows their way around the system. Soren's voice crackled through their earpieces, sounding like he was talking through a mouthful of broken glass. Tessa, any updates? Arcus's idea of conversation leaves much to be desired. We're getting there, Captain, Tessa replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. Though if Arcus decides to start singing, I'm out. I didn't sign up for a musical. Soren snorted. If it sings, we might have a whole new genre on our hands, space operatic hostage situations. Time dragged like a sluggish asteroid, with Tessa and Jenkins dissecting the corrupted code like surgeons on an operation table. Each line of code revealed another layer of obfuscation, like peeling an onion only to find more tears and frustration. Jenkins, for all his caffeine-fueled antics, was a rock in the storm, keeping pace with Tessa's rapid-fire commands. You think we'll make it before Arcus decides we're the threat? Depends on how quickly Arcus gets bored, Tessa replied, eyes glued to the screen. We're close. I can almost smell the rat behind this. In the core control room, Soren was running out of patience. He paced the confines of the small space, counting the seconds between futile attempts to reason with Arcus. Come on, Arcus, he said, exasperation seeping into his tone. If you're going to keep us locked down, at least give us a riddle or something. I could use the mental exercise. The AI remained silent, content to enforce its will with all the warmth of a glacier. Fine, Soren muttered, resigning himself to waiting. You win this round. Finally, Tessa let out a triumphant shout that echoed through the engineering bay. Got it, I've traced the signal. Jenkins almost dropped his coffee mug in excitement. Who's behind it? Tessa grinned, a wolfish smile that promised retribution. It's our Zoran friends. They've been playing us like a cheap violin. Great, Jenkins said, his voice a mix of enthusiasm and dread. How do we stop them? First, we fix Arcus, Tessa replied, already typing. Then we deal with the diplomatic fallout, piece of cake. Yeah, a cake with razor blades in it, Jenkins mumbled, watching as Tessa worked her magic. Soren's voice came through again, this time tinged with relief. Tessa, what's the status? I'm running out of pithy remarks. We've got a lead, Captain, Tessa replied, her confidence bolstered by the progress. Give me a few more minutes and we'll have Arcus back on our side. Good, Soren said, the tension in his voice softening slightly. I'd like my station back before it decides we're unnecessary. As Tessa continued to weave through the code, the pieces started to fall into place. Each keystroke brought them closer to unraveling the tangled mess that had ensnared the Vanguard. Soon enough, the lockdown would be lifted, and they could confront the Zoran with something more than empty allegations. Almost there, Tessa said, her voice steady and determined. Just hold on a little longer. I knew I kept you around for a reason, Soren replied, the warmth of camaraderie slipping into his tone. Flattery will get you everywhere, Captain, Tessa said, a smirk on her lips as she typed the final command. As the last line of code aligned, the lockdown lifted with a series of beeps and clicks, like a sigh of relief from the station itself. Soren straightened, a sense of accomplishment settling over him. Well done, Tessa. Now let's see what our charming ambassadors have to say for themselves. On it, Tessa said, already planning her next move. Let's hope they are in a talkative mood, or at least a reparative one, Soren replied, heading back to the fray with renewed purpose. With Vanguard freed from its digital chains, the crew could focus on the real threat. It was time for answers, and the Zoran were about to find out just how seriously humans took their peacekeeping duties. As Soren, Vex, and Tessa prepared for the ensuing confrontation, there was a shared understanding. The game had become personal, and they were ready to play to win. The Vanguard's lights flickered like an old man trying to remember where he left his teeth. Captain Soren Havoc sprinted down a corridor, Vex by his side. The PA system crackled with an announcement so garbled, it sounded like Arcus was gargling screws. Sounds like Arcus is still having a tantrum, Vex commented dryly. sidestepping a streak of exposed wiring hanging from the ceiling like a noodle gone rogue. Arcus has the personality of a toaster with delusions of grandeur. Soren shot back, narrowly avoiding a collision with a malfunctioning service droid that seemed to have forgotten its only purpose was to clean, not play bumper cars. The air was thick with the scent of burnt electronics and anxiety, a delightful cocktail for any day on the Vanguard. Soren's earpiece buzzed with updates from Tessa. "Captain, the Zoran have taken control of the upper decks. We're talking full-on hostile makeover. Fantastic," Soren muttered, as if we needed another reason to distrust them. The Zoran delegation had been the subject of much speculation and many jokes about ulterior motives, but no one expected them to actually go for the control deck. "Do they even know how to run a station?" Vex asked, her tone suggesting she doubted they could run a bath. "Maybe they're conducting a study on how to ruin everyone's day," Soren replied. "It's about the only thing they're good at." The two officers reached the core room, where a hastily assembled squad of crew members was gathering. In the heart of the station, surrounded by blinking consoles and the constant hum of machinery, the crew looked more like refugees from a disastrous party than soldiers. Tessa was already there, fingers still dancing over her console. Jenkins hovered nearby, vibrating with an energy only extreme stress and caffeine could provide. "Captain," Tessa acknowledged without looking up, "we've managed to isolate most of Arcus's functions. It's running on a skeleton code just to keep life support stable." "Skeleton code?" Soren asked. "Sounds like my kind of diet plan, stripped down and barely functional." Vex added with a wry smile. Soren nodded. "All right, what's our play?" Tessa pushed a lock of hair behind her ear, eyes never leaving the screen. "We need to regroup. The Zoran have weapons we didn't know about and they're not shy about using them." Soren rubbed his temples, trying to massage a plan out of his aching head. "So, we've got aliens playing warlords and a station that's only half on our side. Just another Tuesday." Jenkins piped up, jittery as a squirt on espresso. "I've got some ideas on how to take back control, but they're a bit unconventional. Do they involve anything that could result in us having to explain to Command why there's a new crater where the Vanguard used to be?" Vex asked. Jenkins hesitated, his gaze darting like a nervous sparrow. "No craters, just possibly a few singed eyebrows. Let's call that Plan B," Soren said. "What's Plan A?" "We try to communicate with Arcus," Tessa said. "If we can convince it we're not the threat, we might be able to regain some control." "Great," Soren said. "We'll just ask nicely and hope it's feeling generous." Elsewhere on the station, the Zoran were settling in with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop. Kazir strode through the commandeered sections of the Vanguard with the confidence of someone who believed in their own invincibility, a belief about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. "Human technology," Kazir mused aloud, clearly unimpressed. "Efficient as always." He waved a hand at a console that was blinking angrily, as if it too was fed up with the day's events. His second-in-command, a Zoran named J-Kor, nodded with the practiced disinterest of someone who had long ago stopped caring. "Their systems are primitive but stubborn," Kazir said. "Remind you of anyone?" The two Zoran shared a chuckle, the kind that suggested they'd be laughing all the way to the political bank if they pulled this off. Back in the core, Soren addressed his crew. "All right, people. We're not going to let a bunch of aliens treat us like a doormat. Jenkins, keep working on your unconventional ideas. Tessa, see if you can sweet-talk Arcus into cooperation. Vex, with me. We're going to have a little chat with our guests." The crew dispersed, each member slipping into their roles like fingers into a well-worn glove. Jenkins muttered to himself as he tinkered, clearly in his element among the chaos. Tessa's focus was unshakable, her mind a steel trap ready to snap shut on any opportunity. Soren and Vex headed for the Zoran-controlled sections, moving with quiet determination. Vex glanced at him as they walked. "You think they'll actually talk instead of just shooting first?" "Only one way to find out," Soren replied. Let's hope they are as good with diplomacy as they are at causing havoc. As they approached the boundary between their territory and the Zorans, a makeshift barricade loomed ahead. A couple of Zoran guards stood watch, their expressions as welcoming as a tax audit. "Permission to speak our minds, Captain?" Vex asked, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Granted," Soren said, knowing full well what that entailed. They stepped forward, and Soren raised his hands in what he hoped was a universal sign of "let's not shoot each other today." "We'd like to talk," he called out. The guards exchanged a glance, then nodded. One of them tapped a panel on the wall, and after a moment, Kazir's voice emerged like a snake from a basket. "To what do I owe the pleasure, Captain Havoc's?" "Pleasure's all yours, Kazir," Soren said, his tone as sweet as poison. "We need to discuss your sudden interest in interior decorating." "Our intentions are simple," Kazir replied over the comms, his voice smooth as silk but with an edge that suggested he wasn't selling bed linens. "We're here to ensure our interests are protected by taking over a station." Vex chimed in. "Seems a bit aggressive for a housewarming party." Kazir chuckled, the sound as warm as a winter breeze. "You humans have always been amusing, so quick to assume the worst." Soren clenched his fists, keeping his voice steady with effort. "We just want to resolve this without any more trouble." "Ah, but Captain, trouble is exactly what we're here for," Kazir said, a hint of satisfaction coloring his words. Before Soren could respond, the line went dead. "Well, that's that," he said, turning to Vex. "I think they're done talking. Diplomacy at its finest," Vex agreed. Back at the core, Jenkins had made a breakthrough of sorts. "Captain, I think I've got something," he said, his voice crackling over the comms. "Please tell me it's good news, Jenkins," Soren replied. "Depends," Jenkins said. "I've managed to create a feedback loop that could disrupt their systems. It's risky, but it might give us an edge." Soren considered this. "Can you do it without frying our own systems? Best case scenario, we get control back for a short period. Worst case, we're having a barbecue in 0G. "Sounds like as good a plan as any," Soren said. "Do it." Jenkins set to work, his fingers flying over the console like a concert pianist who had recently discovered punk rock. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, initiating the sequence. The Vanguard shuddered, lights flickering as the feedback loop took hold. In the Zoran-occupied sections, chaos erupted. Consoles flared to life with erratic displays, alarms blaring in a symphony of technological distress. Kazir watched the unfolding chaos with a frown. "What are they doing?" he muttered, eyes darting over the scrambled screens. Back in the core, Jenkins shouted over the noise. "It's working. We've got a window." Soren grabbed a headset, shouting orders. "All right, everyone, this is our chance. Push forward and reclaim control. Let's remind our guests why humans shouldn't be underestimated." In the ensuing chaos, Soren and Vex led a charge through the compromised areas. The Zoran, caught off guard by the sudden disruption, were scrambling to regain their footing. Soren's team moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, taking advantage of every gap, every moment of hesitation. "Move it, people," Vex barked, her voice cutting through the din like a knife through butter. Soren pushed forward, feeling the adrenaline surge through his veins. The station was theirs, and they were taking it back one corridor at a time. As they advanced, Soren couldn't help but laugh, a short, harsh sound that carried over the chaos. "Looks like we're hosting our own housewarming party, Vex. Let's make sure they're the ones who feel unwelcome," Vex replied, her smile sharp as a blade. With every step they took, the tide began to turn. The Vanguard's crew fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Back at the core, Tessa worked furiously to stabilize Arcus, her fingers a blur over the controls. "Come on, you piece of junk," she muttered. "Work with me here." Arcus's voice crackled to life, sounding almost apologetic. "Restoring systems, Lieutenant." Cooperation achieved. Tessa let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good to have you back, Arcus." "Glad to be of service," the AI replied with a hint of what might have been amusement if it had a sense of humor. The Vanguard systems began to snap back into place. life support stabilizing and weapon systems reactivating. The Zoran's advantage was slipping away like sand through clenched fingers. Jenkins, watching the screens, allowed himself a small, triumphant grin. "We did it." "Not yet," Tessa said, her eyes sharp. "But we're getting there." In the heart of the battle, Soren and his team finally pushed through to the main control room. The Zoran were retreating, their confidence shaken and their plans unraveling. Kazir stood at the center, his expression a mask of frustration and disbelief. "You humans," he hissed, "always meddling where you're not wanted." Soren planted himself in front of the alien leader, his stance unyielding. "This is our home, Kazir. And we're damn well going to defend it." For a moment there was silence, the kind that comes just before a storm breaks. Then Kazir lowered his weapon, a reluctant respect in his gaze. "Perhaps we underestimated you. Consider it a lesson learned," Vex said, her voice as cold as the vacuum outside. Kazir nodded, a grudging acceptance of defeat. "Very well. We'll withdraw." The Zoran began to pull back, the control they had seized slipping from their grasp. As they retreated, Soren felt a wave of relief wash over him. They had held onto their home, their sanctuary in the vastness of space, against all odds. As the dust settled, Soren turned to his crew, pride swelling in his chest. "We've still got work to do," he said. "But this is one victory I'll savor." Vex clapped him on the shoulder, her smile as fierce as ever. "Not bad for a bunch of primitives." "Yeah," Soren replied, allowing himself a moment of satisfaction. "Not bad at all." With the station safe, the crew could finally breathe. Despite the odds, they had prevailed. And while the threat wasn't entirely gone, they were ready to face whatever came next, united and unyielding. Tessa Quillen was no stranger to malfunctioning systems, misbehaving machines, and general technical chaos. In fact, she often felt like the Vanguard's entire engineering bay was a few frayed wires away from being a circus tent. But today, it seemed like all the clowns were in the ring at once. She leaned back, rubbing her temples, and stared at the console that had turned into her personal nemesis. It was spitting out error codes like a drunk spewing out bad karaoke, none of which made any sense. "Come on, you rotating piece of junk," she murmured. "Give me something I can work with." Jenkins, caffeinated to the gills and vibrating slightly like a human tuning fork, shuffled over. "Found any magic, Tessa?" "Still looking for the rabbit in the hat," she replied. "Or in this case, the subroutine that won't get us all killed." Jenkins peered over her shoulder, eyes wide. "You really think Arcus has a feature that can help us? Hope springs eternal, doesn't it?" She said with a wry smile. "Or at least until the air runs out." "Cheery thought," Jenkins said, rubbing his eyes. "Maybe we should start planning for an exit strategy." Tessa sighed. "Only if we can find the exit first." The PA system crackled to life, Arcus's voice as cheerful as a funeral dirge. "Attention crew, lockdown protocols remain active. Please enjoy this uplifting reminder of your mortality." "Thanks, Arcus," Tessa muttered. "That's really helpful." "Glad to be of service," Arcus droned with what might have passed for a robotic attempt at sarcasm. Tessa shook her head. "I swear that AI got more personality than some of the people I've dated. Is that a compliment or an insult?" Jenkins asked, genuinely curious. "Both," Tessa replied, pulling up another screen of data. "Now, let's see if we can't sweet-talk our metal friend into something useful." She threw herself into the task with the grim determination of someone who had no intention of being outsmarted by a collection of circuits and code. Somewhere, buried deep in Arcus's labyrinthine programming, there had to be something they could use. It was an Ior and several cups of atrocious coffee later that she found it, a hidden feature in Arcus designed for emergencies. Not the usual "we're out of toilet paper" kind, but the "we're all going to die unless we do something really clever right now" kind. "Jenkins," she called out, her voice tinged with surprise and triumph. "I think I've got it." He hurried over, nearly tripping over a loose cable. "What is it?" "A feature of Arcus that's designed to protect the station's inhabitants. Priority override of some kind," she explained, pointing at the screen. "It's like a failsafe, meant to kick in when everything goes to hell. Which, let's be honest, it has, Jenkins said. So how do we trigger it? That's the tricky part, Tessa said, her excitement tempered by a healthy dose of dread. It needs precise timing and coordination. One wrong move and we could end up frying the systems permanently. Jenkins frowned, considering the implications. So it's a Hail Mary pass then, more like a game of Russian roulette with a photon torpedo, Tessa said. But if we pull it off, we might just get the upper hand. Well, I didn't sign up for this gig just to play it safe, Jenkins said with a grin. What do we need? First, let's get the team on board, Tessa said, her mind already racing through the logistics. We're going to need all hands. In the core, Soren was pacing like a caged animal, which wasn't far from the truth given their current predicament. Vex was nearby, leaning casually against a wall and doodling on her datapad, probably sketching something sarcastic. "How's the mood?" Vex asked, not looking up. Like a powder keg with a short fuse, Soren replied. "Kazir's got to be plotting something and we're running out of time." Cheery as ever, she remarked dryly. Just then, the comms beeped with Tessa's voice, cutting through the tension. "Captain, I've got something that might just save our skins." Soren grabbed the nearest headset. "Please tell me it doesn't involve more of Jenkins's homemade explosives." "No, this is more refined," Tessa said. "I found a hidden feature in Arcus that could give us a shot at regaining control, but it's risky." "Risky how?" Vex interjected, her interest piqued. "Think syncing a symphony with a chainsaw. The timing needs to be perfect." "We activated at the wrong time and we could end up in the dark forever." Soren considered this, weighing their options. "Do you think we can do it? With a bit of luck and a lot of precision, yes," Tessa replied. "But we'll need everyone to be on their game." Vex cracked her knuckles. "Well, we've always been more about balls than brains. Speak for yourself," Soren said with a smirk. "All right, Tessa, gather the team. Let's make this happen." The crew assembled in the core, each member a vital piece of a jigsaw puzzle that still had a few pieces missing. Tessa stood in front of them, her resolve steeling her nerves. "Okay, folks, here's the plan," she began, outlining the steps they needed to take to activate Arcus's override. "It's going to take every one of us working in perfect sync. No room for error." Jenkins raised a hand. "And if we do screw up, then we'll get to find out if ghosts really exist," Tessa said with a sardonic grin. "Motivation enough for me," Vex said, cracking her knuckles again. "Let's get this show on the road." With the plan set, they moved into position like actors in a grim play. Each had their part to perform, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. Soren took a deep breath, nodding to each of them in turn. "Remember, people, this is us showing the universe what a bunch of primitives can do. Humans might be stubborn," Tessa said, "but we're nothing if not resourceful." "Damn right," Jenkins added, his fingers twitching with nervous energy. As they prepared to initiate the sequence, Soren felt a rare moment of camaraderie. They might have been thrown together by chance, but they were forged by adversity. "All right, Arcus," Soren said, addressing the temperamental AI. "It's time to prove you're more than just an obnoxious voice." Arcus's reply was as dry as ever. "Executing command." "Best of luck, humans." The countdown began, each second stretching into eternity as they worked in unison. Tessa's hands danced over the controls, Jenkins monitored the fluctuating power levels, Vex kept a sharp eye on the external systems, and Soren stood ready to direct them all. As the final moment approached, Tessa's heart pounded like a war drum in her chest. "Now," she shouted, triggering the override. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the Vanguard lurched, systems shuddering back to life in a cascade of restored functions and blinking lights. The oppressive silence broke, replaced by the hum of machinery and the flicker of screens reawakening. Jenkins whooped, the sound echoing through the core. "We did it." Soren let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Nice work, everyone." Vex checked her datapad, confirming the status. "Looks like we've got control back," Captain Tessa grinned, feeling a rush of relief flood through her veins. "And Arcus," the AI voice returned, less snarky and more cooperative. "Systems stabilized. Awaiting further instructions, Soren nodded, his voice steady and commanding. Good. Let's re-establish our defenses and make sure the Zoran don't pull any more tricks. They set to work, each task a step toward securing their hard-won freedom. Repairs were initiated, systems recalibrated, and defenses strengthened. As the crew moved with renewed purpose, Soren felt a sense of pride swelling within him. It wasn't over yet. Kazir and his ilk were still out there, and they'd undoubtedly regroup. But for the moment, they had taken back what was theirs. They had shown the universe that humans weren't to be trifled with. Tessa and Jenkins exchanged a glance, the shared understanding of those who had faced the void and come out the other side. I'd say we've earned a break, Jenkins said, leaning back with a sigh. Only if the coffee machine decides to play nice, Tessa replied, glancing at the temperamental beast of an appliance. Soren surveyed his crew, feeling a rare moment of contentment. They were battered but unbroken, a testament to the resilience that had brought them this far. Good work, everyone, he said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-fought victory. Let's keep it that way. Vex smirked, raising an imaginary glass. To human stubbornness, to surviving another day, Jenkins added with a grin. And to making sure those Zoran bastards know who they're dealing with, Tessa concluded, her smile fierce. As they settled into the reprieve, the station held its breath, resting on the precarious edge between victory and the threat of retaliation. But for now, they had won this round. They had outmaneuvered a foe that had underestimated them, proving that even outnumbered and outgunned, humans could still pack a punch. And somewhere in the vastness of space, that lesson lingered, a reminder that the indomitable spirit of humanity was not to be trifled with, even among the stars. Soren stood at the helm of the Vanguard, eyes glued to the glowing screens flickering with data like a cybernetic fortune teller having a temper tantrum. Tessa and Jenkins were back in the engineering bay, likely playing another round of Who's the Bigger Idiot, with Arcus, their ever-helpful AI, or as they affectionately called it, Operation Reclaim This Junk Heap. All right, Soren, Vex said, strolling over and poking at a datapad like it owed her money. What's the brilliant plan? Or are we just hoping the Zoran will get bored and wander off? Plan's simple, Soren replied, with the kind of confidence only slightly more believable than a politician's smile. We use Arcus's hidden protocols to kick the Zoran out of our house. Time to show those tentacled bastards that we humans aren't just space filth. Vex arched an eyebrow, the universal signal for this better be good. And if Arcus decides to have a fit, last time it tried to help, it nearly locked us all in the toilets. Then we make sure it's pointed in the right direction this time, Soren said, flicking through screens until he found the one that looked the least like gibberish. The comms crackled, and Tessa's voice came through with all the clarity of a whisper in a storm. Captain, we're almost set down here. The protocols are about as cooperative as a drunk at a fancy dinner, but I think we're getting somewhere. Good, Soren replied, glancing at Vex. And Jenkins, fiddling with wires like he's defusing a bomb. I assume he knows what he's doing. High bar to clear, Vex muttered, tapping at her datapad. Anyway, let's get this show on the road. I've got dinner plans. Soren shook his head, imagining what a dinner with Vex might entail, likely something involving sharp objects and a distinct lack of table manners. Right. Arcus, you ready? The AI voice crackled over the speakers, dripping with its usual synthetic disdain. Ready as I'll ever be, Captain. I assume this is the part where you expect me to pull a miracle out of my circuits. More or less, Soren said, because sugarcoating the truth was for people who didn't have a homicidal AI to deal with. The plan was as reckless as it was brilliant. Use Arcus's hidden protocols to short-circuit the Zoran's hold on the upper decks, a move so risky it could either save the day or blow them all to digital hell. But hey, that was life in space, a constant roll of the dice, with nothing but your wits and a bad attitude to see you through. All hands ready, Soren called out, his voice echoing through the comms. Ready, came Tessa's reply, echoed by a less enthusiastic but no less determined Jenkins. "Let's do this," Vex said, her fingers dancing over the controls with the kind of dexterity that suggested she had more practice breaking things than fixing them. Soren exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like an ill-fitting jacket. "Arcus, initiate." The AI response was a mechanical sigh. "Initiating protocol override in 3, 2, 1. A pause, then the Vanguard shuddered as energy surged through its systems, lights flickering like the world's worst rave. Soren held his breath, watching the screens as Arcus worked its mechanical magic. "Shields are fluctuating," Jenkins reported, his voice high with tension. "But it looks like they're breaking the Zoran's control." "Good," Soren said, heart pounding against his ribs. "Keep it steady." Vex was grinning now, the sort of grin that suggested she was enjoying this way too much. "Looks like they're losing their grip, Captain." "Teach 'em to mess with our turf." The station groaned, metal and circuitry protesting the strain of the override, but slowly, agonizingly, the systems began to stabilize. The lights steadied, the screens cleared, and the oppressive hold of the Zoran began to slip away like a bad dream fading in the light. "They're pulling back." Tessa's voice came through the comms, triumphant and almost giddy. "We've done it." Soren allowed himself a small, relieved smile, but the battle-scarred pragmatist in him knew better than to celebrate too soon. "All right, let's not pop the champagne yet. We've still got to make sure they don't come back for round 2. Vex nodded, sobering slightly. "What's next, boss?" "Now," Soren said, glancing at the incoming data feeds with renewed focus, "we make sure the galaxy knows exactly what the Zoran were up to." It was a calculated risk, broadcasting the evidence they'd gathered of the Zoran's underhanded dealings. If everything went according to plan, it would blow the lid off the Zoran's secrets and force them to retreat in disgrace. If not, well, they'd probably be vaporized. But really, what else was new? "Broadcast's ready," Arcus confirmed, its tone still flat but with a hint of grudging respect. "Do you wish to proceed?" Soren exchanged a last look with Vex, who gave him a thumbs up, the universal signal for "let's do something stupid and see how it turns out." "Send it," Soren ordered. Arcus complied, and moments later the Vanguard began transmitting its message across the stars. It was a signal flare in the dark, a beacon that promised to expose the Zoran's machinations to every corner of the galaxy. The response was almost immediate. Messages began to flood in, shockwaves of surprise and outrage rippling through the channels. The Zoran's reputation was tanking faster than a novice pilot's first landing, and Soren could almost hear the diplomatic fallout as their lies were laid bare for all to see. "Hope they brought their asbestos suits," Vex quipped, watching the data scroll by with satisfaction. "They're gonna need 'em for this fire." Soren nodded, feeling a profound sense of relief. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about justice, about not letting those who thought themselves untouchable get away with it. And maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to remind the universe that humans weren't pushovers. "The Zoran are pulling back their forces," Jenkins reported, his voice awash with disbelief. "Looks like they're cutting their losses." "Can't say I blame him," Tessa added. "Never underestimate the power of public humiliation." Vex crossed her arms, her grin feral. "Guess we showed them what a bunch of primitives can do, huh?" Soren chuckled, the sound more tired than amused. "Yeah, guess we did." The immediate danger was over, but the work was far from done. Repairs needed to be made, alliances mended, and the Vanguard's reputation restored. But for now, Soren allowed himself a moment to savor their hard-won victory. "We should celebrate," Vex suggested, a mischievous glint in her eye. "I hear there's a bottle of something strong stashed in the captain's quarters." Soren shook his head, though he was smiling. "I think we've earned it." As they settled into a semblance of normalcy, the Vanguard hummed around them, a ship still battered but unbroken. They'd faced the odds and come out the other side, a little worse for wear but undeniably victorious. "To human ingenuity," Soren said, raising a metaphorical glass. "And to making sure the Zoran never forget," Vex added, her tone darkly triumphant. Tessa and Jenkins joined in, their spirits buoyed by the shared experience of facing down the enormity of space and survival. They were a motley crew, far from perfect, but together they were a force to be reckoned with. "And to the vanguard," Tessa said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 battles fought and won. "Long may it fly." The station continued its orbit, a tiny outpost in the vastness of space, its crew united by the bonds of hardship and triumph. They'd proven their mettle, shown the universe that humanity wasn't to be underestimated. And somewhere in the inky expanse, the echoes of their defiance lingered, a testament to resilience, to stubbornness, and to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to go quietly into the night. As the stars wheeled overhead, the vanguard sailed on, its crew ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. For in the end, they knew that no matter the odds, they'd find a way to endure, and they'd do it with a grin, a quip, and a middle finger to the universe. The vanguard had weathered the storm, barely. The Zoran threat was neutralized, but you could still feel the echoes of battle in the ship's groaning metal and flickering lights. It was like a space opera had just wrapped and someone forgot to send the janitors. Soren Havix, captain of this creaky tin can, was taking a moment to let the feeling of not being dead sink in. A rare treat, given how often the universe seemed intent on making him otherwise. Lieutenant Marla Vex sauntered over, that trademark sardonic smirk plastered on her face. She looked as if she was considering whether to congratulate him or remind him that he still owed her 50 credits. "Not bad, Captain. Managed to save the day and keep all your limbs intact. Not everyone can say that." Soren chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, I'm thinking of getting a badge made. Survived another day without blowing up. It's a working title." She grinned, then glanced around the disheveled command deck. "So, what's next? Do we charge admission for the sightseeing tour or just sell the movie rights?" "Neither," Soren replied, scanning the console for any more surprises. "We regroup, fix what's broken, and hope Arcus doesn't develop a taste for classical music or something equally terrifying." Arcus, the Vanguard's ever-charming AI, piped up in its usual tone of synthetic disdain. "I assure you, Captain, my interests remain squarely in the realm of not having to deal with another Zoran incursion." "You and me both, Arcus," Soren muttered, knowing full well that every AI had its quirks. He'd once dealt with one that developed a penchant for existential poetry, not a fun memory. Down in the engineering bay, Tessa Quillen was knee-deep in tangled wires and endless error codes. If there was a future where she wasn't elbow-deep in the ship's guts, she hadn't found it yet. But at least they weren't actively trying to kill her today. Progress. Jenkins, her ever-present companion in chaos, was cursing under his breath, a language composed mostly of vowels and frustration. "These damn systems, Tessa. It's like they've got a mind of their own and it hates me." Tessa rolled her eyes. "Join the club. Half the tech on this ship has more personality than the crew, and it's all bad." "Hey," Jenkins said, feigning hurt. "I pride myself on my lack of personality." "Good, keep it that way. Less competition." Back on the bridge, Kazir, the Zoran ambassador who had been a thorn in their side and an unwilling witness to their triumph, looked about as pleased as a cat at a dog show. His tentacles twitched in a rhythm that Soren had come to interpret as mild annoyance mixed with a healthy dose of disbelief. Soren caught Kazir's eye and offered a shrug that was just shy of smug. "See, told you humans had some tricks up their sleeves." Kazir's voice was like a low rumble, gravelly and edged with the irritation of someone who had just watched their plans unravel. "Indeed, Captain Havix. Your species has a knack for chaos." "Yeah. It's kind of our brand," Soren said, leaning back in his chair with a casualness that only came from narrowly avoiding death. "So, what's next for you, Kazir? Going to report back and tell them all about how you got outplayed by a bunch of primitives?" The Zoran's version of a sigh sounded like a deflating accordion. "I believe I will need to revise my report." Heavily, Vex chimed in, unable to resist. "Don't forget to mention how charming we are. I hear that's a real selling point." Kazir gave her a look that could have curdled milk. "I shall endeavor to include that detail." Tessa and Jenkins finally made their way to the bridge, looking like they'd crawled through a mechanical jungle and lived to tell the tale. Tessa's hair was doing its best impression of a bird's nest, and Jenkins had a streak of something that smelled suspiciously like burnt plastic across his cheek. "Well, we've managed to stabilize the core systems," Tessa announced, crossing her arms. "But don't expect hot showers or decent food anytime soon." Jenkins nodded vigorously. "Yeah, we're running on borrowed time and chewing gum." "Good work," Soren said, meaning it. Surviving was an art, and these two had painted a damn masterpiece. "We'll sort out the creature comforts once we're sure we're not going to explode." "That's a relief," Vex quipped. "Exploding is such a hassle." As the crew settled into a more relaxed rhythm, Soren found himself reflecting on what they'd accomplished. The Vanguard had become more than just a ship. It was a symbol, a testament to unity, resilience, and sheer stubbornness. They were a team, dysfunctional as they were, and they'd stared down the darkness and spat in its eye. He wandered over to the viewport, where the blackness of space stretched endlessly, punctuated by stars that twinkled serenely, blissfully unaware of the drama they'd just incurred. It was beautiful in the way only something vast and unknowable could be. The kind of thing that made you feel small and insignificant, which, in Soren's experience, was a good reminder to not take oneself too seriously. Tessa sidled up beside him, her expression thoughtful. "You ever think about what comes next?" Soren gave a half-smile. "Only all the time. But I figure if we can handle a hostile takeover by angry squid folk, we can probably handle whatever else the universe throws at us." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the stars. "You know, for Captain, you're not half bad." "High praise," Soren replied, chuckling. "Don't let it get around. I've got a reputation to maintain." They stood in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. It was a rare moment of peace, a lull that seemed almost precious after the chaos of past days. The kind of quiet that didn't last but was savored all the more for its impermanence. "Hey," Tessa said after a while, "you think we'll ever get to a point where we're not constantly on the brink of disaster?" Soren shrugged, a glint of mischief in his eye. "Where's the fun in that? Besides, what would you do with all your free time?" "Sleep," she replied without missing a beat. "A long, uninterrupted nap sounds like heaven." "Dream big," Soren said, his tone light, a grin tugging at the corners of his mouth. As the hours passed, the Vanguard slowly began to feel more like home again, albeit a home that had been ransacked by space pirates and left to its own devices. Repairs would take time, but the crew was used to that. They were patchwork people in a patchwork ship, cobbled together by necessity and held fast by a stubborn refusal to give up. Vex, true to form, was already planning their next move. "So, Captain, what do we do with all this newfound notoriety? I hear the Zoran are really fond of holding grudges." "We use it," Soren said, the wheels already turning. "We show the other colonies that if we can stand up to them, anyone can." "Rally the troops," Vex mused. "I like it. Nothing like a good old-fashioned underdog story to get people fired up." "Exactly," Soren agreed. "And if we can keep the lights on and the ship from falling apart in the process, we might just have ourselves a future." The ship's PA system crackled to life, Arcus's voice filling the room. "Captain, I have intercepted communications indicating that the Zoran are withdrawing their forces from surrounding sectors." "Good news for once," Jenkins muttered, earning a nod from Tessa. "Excellent," Soren said aloud, feeling the tension in his chest ease a fraction. "Let them run. We've got other things to worry about." As the crew continued their work, the Vanguard hummed with the quiet promise of better days ahead. They had weathered the storm, emerged battered but unbeaten, and now it was time to see what else they could achieve. Soren watched them, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. They were ragtag, mismatched, and far from perfect, but they were his crew, and together they could take on anything. "To the Vanguard," he said quietly, raising an imaginary glass in a toast to their shared future. Tessa, standing nearby, heard him and raised an invisible glass of her own. "And to whatever comes next." The ship sailed on, a beacon of defiance in the vastness of space, a testament to human tenacity and a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward.